My name is Alara, and I am 32 years old. For the last 8 years, my life has been a quiet composition of predictable rhythms, a gentle hum of routine that I found not restrictive, but comforting. I am, by profession and by nature, an archivist. I spend my days at the Cedar Creek Historical Society, surrounded by the tangible ghosts of the past, brittle letters, faded photographs, and the faint, sweet scent of aging paper. My small one-bedroom apartment, with its view of the perpetually damp, moss-covered rooftops of our city, was my sanctuary. It was a life I had built for myself, piece by meticulous piece, a life of quiet independence and carefully managed finances. This careful management was a necessity born from a lifetime of quiet observation. Growing up in a modest house on the outskirts of Cedar Creek was to understand, from a very young age, the subtle and not-so-subtle currents of familial preference. My sister, Serafina, 2 years my junior, was the sun around which our family orbited. She was a whirlwind of artistic temperament and fleeting passions, a brilliant, beautiful creature who captured all the light in a room. My parents, Robert and Diane, were not cruel people, they were simply captivated. They saw in Sarah a reflection of their own unrealized dreams, a vessel for a more vibrant, creative life than the one they had settled into. When Sarah declared, at 17, that she needed a dedicated studio space, my father converted our garage, insulating the walls and installing skylights himself. When I, at 18, needed a new laptop for my college coursework, I spent the summer working double shifts at a local diner to afford it. Sarah's canvases and expensive oil paints were a necessary investment in her talent. My textbooks were a practical expense I was expected to manage. The praise for her latest abstract painting was effusive and endless, while my Dean's List certificates were met with a pleasant, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before the conversation inevitably drifted back to Sarah's latest artistic breakthrough or emotional crisis. I never grew bitter, not truly. I simply learned to be self-reliant. I understood that the love my parents had for me was a steady, low-burning flame, while their love for Sarah was a bonfire, dazzling, demanding, and consuming all the available oxygen. I navigated my life accordingly. I secured scholarships, worked part-time jobs through university, and graduated with a degree in history and a mountain of student loan debt that felt like my own personal, hard-won mountain to climb. I was proud of the life I had built, of my quiet apartment and my meaningful work. I was not rich, but I was solvent. I was not the center of anyone's universe, but I was the steadfast captain of my own. And then came the rain-soaked Tuesday that changed everything. It had been a long day at the archive, spent cataloging a new collection of letters from the city's founding families. On my way home, I stopped for groceries, the drizzle outside casting a gray, dreamy filter over the world. At the checkout, a brightly colored sign advertised the state lottery jackpot, $3.8 million. I rarely, if ever, played. It felt like an extravagance, a fool's hope. But that day, for a reason I still can't articulate, I felt a strange, quiet impulse. "I'll take one of those, please," I said to the cashier, adding a $2 ticket to my purchase of bread, milk, and a small block of cheese. "You never know," the young man said with a practiced smile. "Stranger things have happened," I replied, tucking the small slip of paper into my wallet and thinking nothing more of it. That evening, I ate a simple soup at my small kitchen table, listening to the rain tap against the windowpane. I was reading a book of poetry when the local news came on, the anchor announcing the winning lottery numbers. Idly, I pulled the ticket from my wallet, smoothing it out on the table. The first number matched. A small, pleasant coincidence. The second number matched. My breath hitched. The third. I put my book down, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thrum against my ribs. Fourth number. Fifth. When the final number was read, and it, too, matched the last number on my ticket, the world seemed to fall silent. The only sound was the rain and the frantic, disbelieving pulse in my ears. I stared at the ticket for a long, long time. I checked the numbers on the news station's website. I wrote them down on a napkin and compared them, digit by digit. There was no mistake. All 6 numbers. $3.8 million. My hands began to shake. I carefully took a photograph of the ticket with my phone, then placed the ticket itself in a small, archival-quality plastic sleeve, a habit from work, and tucked it between the pages of a dense, leather-bound history of Cedar Creek that sat on my highest shelf. It felt like the safest place in the world. My first call was to Rachel. My best friend since college, Rachel was the antithesis of my quiet nature, bold, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal. "You need to come over," I said, my voice a thready whisper. "Something has happened. Are you okay?" "Do I need to call someone?" she asked, her voice instantly sharp with concern. "No, I'm okay. Just come over. Please." She arrived in under 20 minutes, her hair damp from the rain, her face a mask of worry. I didn't speak. I simply pointed to the napkin with the numbers written on it, then showed her the photo of the ticket on my phone. She looked from the phone to the napkin, then back to the phone. "No," she whispered. "No way. Alara, is this a joke? Can you check the numbers again?" I asked, my voice small. "I think I might be dreaming." She pulled out her own phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she said, her voice full of awe. "It's real. Alara, it's real. You just won $3.8 million. The rest of that night was a surreal blur of emotions, disbelief giving way to giddy laughter, followed by waves of overwhelming anxiety. Rachel stayed over, and we sat on my worn sofa until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, talking about what this meant. I could pay off my student loans. I could buy a house, a real house with a garden. I could travel. I could donate to the Historical Society, which was perpetually underfunded. For the first time, my future felt not like a carefully navigated path, but a wide-open landscape of possibility. The next morning, I called in sick to work and, with trembling hands, dialed the number for the State Lottery Commission. They confirmed the process. I needed to come to their headquarters in the state capital to have the ticket verified. Rachel insisted on driving me. "You are in no condition to operate a vehicle," she stated, and she was right. At the lottery office, a series of kind, professional officials walked me through the procedure. They explained the options of a lump sum payment versus an annuity. They advised me to seek immediate counsel from a financial advisor and a lawyer. And they had me pose for a photo with a giant, ceremonial check, a garish and oversized symbol of my new reality. The actual funds, they explained, would be processed and transferred electronically within a few weeks once I'd made my decisions and set up the appropriate accounts. As I held that giant, fake check, smiling weakly for a camera I knew would be used for their press releases, the reality began to solidify. My life, the quiet, predictable life I had so carefully constructed, had been irrevocably altered. But I had no idea that the greatest change would not be to my finances, but to my understanding of the family I thought I knew so well. The lottery official's primary piece of advice was to maintain privacy. "Sudden wealth changes your relationships," a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Gable had warned me. "Take your time. Be deliberate about who you tell and when." I knew she was right, but the thought of keeping such monumental news from my family felt strange, almost dishonest. Despite our lopsided dynamic, they were my parents and Sarah was my sister. And there was a small, uncharitable part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, that wanted them to see me. Not just as the responsible, dependable Alara, but as someone who had, through a stroke of pure, dumb luck, achieved something extraordinary. Perhaps now, they would finally see me as an equal. I decided to tell them at our regular monthly Sunday dinner. I spent the days leading up to it in a state of quiet anxiety, rehearsing the words in my head. I met with a financial advisor, a sharp and compassionate woman named Ms. Thornton, who helped me begin the process of setting up a trust and a series of secure accounts. I also rented a safe deposit box at my bank, where I placed the original lottery ticket and all the official paperwork. The giant ceremonial check, a flimsy piece of cardboard, I tucked away in a closet. When I arrived at my parents' house that Sunday, the familiar scent of my mother's roast chicken filled the air. "You seem different," my mother observed as I helped her set the table. "You've got a sparkle in your eye." "I have some news," I said, my heart starting to pound. "I'll wait until Dad and Sarah are here." When we were all seated around the familiar oak dining table, I took a deep breath. "Something incredible happened to me this week," I began. I won the lottery." My father chuckled. "Did you now? What's that, $50? "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The state jackpot. It's $3.8 million. The clatter of cutlery ceased. My parents stared at me, their faces a canvas of disbelief. Then, my mother's face broke into a wide, ecstatic smile. "Oh, Alara! My goodness! That's wonderful!" She actually got up and hugged me, a rare and slightly awkward display of affection. "Wait until Sarah hears this," my father exclaimed, his eyes shining. And there it was. Not 30 seconds of my news before I was connected to my sister. As if summoned, Serafina swept through the front door, characteristically late, trailing a scent of jasmine and turpentine. "Sorry, everyone. I lost track of time in the studio. What's all the excitement?" "Alara won the lottery," my mother announced, her voice brimming with a joy that already felt proprietary. $3.8 million. Sarah's eyes widened, a series of emotions flitting across her expressive face. Surprise, then delight, then a flicker of something more calculating. She rushed to hug me, squeezing me tightly. "Ellie, that's incredible. Our lives are going to change so much." The use of the word "our" sent a small, cold knot forming in my stomach. Before I could even formulate a response, my father cleared his throat. "This is perfect timing, actually. Sarah, why don't you tell your sister about the little cash flow problem you're having with the studio?" Sarah, to her credit, looked momentarily embarrassed. "Dad, it's not a big deal. It's just, the art world. It's feast or famine." Her latest venture was a line of hand-dyed silk scarves and bespoke perfumes she called Aura Botanicals, run out of a small, expensive studio space she was renting downtown. My parents had already given her the seed money for it, which I knew they couldn't really afford. "It's more than a cash flow problem," my father corrected, his tone paternal and firm. "The rent is 2 months behind, and the supplier for your organic essential oils is threatening to go to collections." Okay, Sarah said, shooting him an annoyed glance before turning her dazzling smile back to me. "But that's boring business stuff. The point is, this is amazing for you. For us. I mean, if you were looking to invest in a local artisan, I know a very promising one." I sat there, my half-eaten dinner growing cold on my plate. They hadn't asked me a single question about how I felt, what I planned to do, or what my dreams were. The conversation had pivoted instantly and entirely to how my good fortune could be used to solve Sarah's perennial financial woes. "I haven't even received the money yet," I said carefully, choosing my words. "There's a whole process, and I've been talking to a financial advisor about taxes and long-term planning." "Family is the best long-term plan," my father said, his voice taking on the tone of a man delivering an undeniable truth. "And with that kind of money, you can easily solve your sister's problems and still have plenty left over for yourself." The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. "I have my own debts to think about," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "My student loans, for starters." "Student loans?" My mother scoffed lightly. "Don't be silly, dear. That's a drop in the bucket for a millionaire." "It's not a drop in the bucket to me," I countered, feeling a lifetime of suppressed resentments begin to stir. "I've been paying them off every month for 10 years. This is my chance to be free of that." "Don't be so selfish, Alara," my mother said, her tone shifting to the familiar, disappointed cadence I knew so well. "Your sister has a real opportunity here. She just needs a little help to get her business off the ground." "What about my opportunity?" I asked, the words spilling out before I could stop them. For once, something has happened for me. Why does it immediately have to become about Sarah? Sarah looked genuinely hurt. I can't believe you're saying that. If I won, I would give you half without even thinking about it. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. 3 years prior, our grandmother had left Sarah a small inheritance of $15,000. She had spent it all on a research trip to Morocco and came back with a new line of kaftans that never sold. She had not offered anyone in the family so much as a souvenir. The rest of the dinner was agonizingly tense. My parents made thinly veiled references to filial duty, while Sarah vacillated between wounded artist and savvy entrepreneur pitching an investment. I left as soon as I politely could, the joy of my win completely eclipsed by the heavy weight of their expectations. I drove home with tears of frustration blurring the streetlights. Once inside my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and called Rachel. "Let me guess," she said after I'd recounted the evening. "They've already spent it for you." "They didn't even wait for dessert," I said, my voice breaking. It was like my winning was just a convenient plot device in the ongoing drama of saving Serafina. "I'm so sorry, Elle," she said gently. "But you can't let them do this. This is your chance to build a life for yourself, free and clear. You have to protect it." I took a deep breath, the wine and Rachel's steadying voice calming my frayed nerves. "I know," I said. "I'm going to do exactly what Ms. Thornton advised. Pay my debts, secure my future, and set some very, very firm boundaries." I had no idea how violently my family would push against those boundaries in the days to come. The pressure began the very next morning. A call from my mother at 7:15 a.m. "I was thinking," she said, her voice bright and determined, as if our tense dinner had never happened. "We should all sit down with Serafina's business plan. I'm sure once you see the numbers, you'll understand what a sound investment it is." "Mom, I'm getting ready for work," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. "And I've already told you, I'm not making any decisions right now." "There's nothing to decide, Alara. It's family. You give her half, she gets her business on solid ground, and everyone is happy. It's simple." "Giving away nearly $2 million is not simple," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "I need to go." I hung up before she could protest further. The rest of the day was a digital siege. Missed calls from my father. A text from my mother with a link to an article titled "The Joy of Giving." And a long, rambling message from Sarah, complete with flowery prose about her artistic vision and a bulleted list of her most pressing debts, which totaled a shocking $95,000. I ignored them all and focused on my work, finding solace in the quiet, ordered world of the archive. During my lunch break, I called Ms. Thornton and updated her. "This is a classic sudden wealth scenario," she said sympathetically. "Stay firm. Any money you give should be treated as a gift, with no expectation of it being a recurring event. And I highly recommend getting any such agreement in writing." That evening, I found a crisp, white envelope slid under my apartment door. It was from my father. Inside was not a letter, but a printed-out spreadsheet he had clearly created, titled Family Financial Realignment. It detailed how my winnings could be allocated, a significant portion to clear Sarah's debts and provide working capital, a smaller amount for my student loans, and a family travel fund to be managed by my parents. The audacity of it was staggering. It wasn't a request, it was a directive. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the recycling bin. The next day, my parents and sister escalated their tactics. They showed up at my apartment building unannounced that evening, just as I was getting home from work. "We need to talk," my father said, his arms crossed over his chest, blocking my path to the lobby door. "We can't have this conversation in the parking lot," I said, my heart sinking. Reluctantly, I let them up to my apartment, the small space instantly feeling crowded and fraught with tension. "We are very disappointed in your attitude, Alara," my father began, forgoing any pleasantries. "We raised you to be a generous person." "I am a generous person," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "But this is my future. My one chance to have the kind of security you always provided for Sarah, but that I've had to build for myself. That is a cruel and untrue thing to say, my mother said, her eyes welling with tears. We have always treated you both equally. The gaslighting was so profound it almost made me laugh. Equally? I asked. Did you take out a second mortgage to pay for my college tuition? Did you fund 3 of my failed business ventures? No. I worked my way through school, and I've held a steady job my entire adult life. Sarah has not. That is not equal. Sarah, who had been sitting silently on my sofa, finally spoke. So you're punishing me for being an artist? For choosing a more difficult path. I'm not punishing you, I said, looking her directly in the eye. I'm simply refusing to let your difficult path derail my own. I have worked my entire life for stability. This money is my chance to finally have it. I will not squander it. The argument raged for over an hour. They pleaded, they cajoled, they accused, they demanded. Finally, emotionally battered and exhausted, I stood up. This conversation is over, I said, my voice low but unwavering. I need you to leave. My father's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. If you turn your back on your family, don't expect us to be here for you when you need us. The only time you seem to need me, I replied, the painful truth of it hanging in the air, is when I have something you want. After they finally left, the silence in my apartment was a welcome relief. I collapsed onto my couch, feeling drained but also strangely empowered. For the first time in my life, I had not backed down. I had not placated. I had held my ground. Worried they might return, I called Rachel. Can I stay with you for a few days? I asked. I just need some space to breathe. My door is always open, she said immediately. Pack a bag. I'll put the kettle on. As I threw some clothes and toiletries into an overnight bag, a deep sense of unease settled over me. I felt like I was running away, but I also knew I was running toward my own preservation. I grabbed my laptop, my phone, and the spare key to my apartment that I kept in a kitchen drawer. As I did, I noticed that the key my parents had, one I'd given them years ago in case of an emergency, was still on their keyring. I made a mental note to ask for it back, a small but significant act of reclaiming my space. I had no idea how urgently I would need to do so. I spent 3 blessedly quiet days at Rachel's. I went to work as usual, but coming home to her calm, plant-filled apartment instead of my own felt like a respite. The calls and texts from my family continued, but they were easier to ignore from a distance. I sent one group text, I need space. Please respect that. My decision is final. This only prompted a fresh wave of messages, alternating between wounded, how could you be so cold, and threatening, you will regret pushing us away. On the 4th day, a Friday, I had to stop by my apartment during my lunch break. I had left a crucial file for a grant application the Historical Society was submitting, and the deadline was that afternoon. Rachel was tied up in meetings and couldn't come with me. I'll be quick, I assured her over the phone. In and out in 5 minutes. The building was quiet as I let myself into the main lobby. Everything seemed normal as I walked down the hall to my apartment. I put my key in the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. And froze. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke. And there were voices coming from my living room. My parents. My blood ran cold. My first instinct was to back out, to run, to call the police. But a hot surge of adrenaline and violation propelled me forward. I strode into my living room to a scene of bizarre, domestic vandalism. My mother was standing over a small metal trash can, a look of grim purpose on her face. A thin curl of smoke rose from it. My father stood beside her, his arms crossed, a sentry at a strange ritual. What are you doing in my apartment? I demanded, my voice raw with shock. My father turned to me, his expression chillingly calm. If you won't share, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, then you won't get a penny. My eyes darted to the trash can. Inside, the charred, blackened remains of a large piece of paper were smoldering. It was shaped like the giant, ceremonial check. They had broken into my home and burned my lottery winnings. The audacity of it, the sheer theatrical madness, was so overwhelming that a completely unexpected reaction bubbled up inside me. I began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, a sound of pure disbelief, and then it swelled into helpless, unbridled laughter. Tears streamed down my face as I leaned against the doorframe for support. My parents stared at me, their smug satisfaction dissolving into utter confusion. "What is so funny?" my mother snapped, her composure cracking. "Have you gone mad?" "No," I gasped, wiping my eyes. "No, I think I've finally gone sane. This is the most ridiculous thing I have ever seen." "We are trying to save you from your own selfishness," my father blustered, his confidence faltering. "By committing breaking and entering and arson?" I asked, my laughter finally subsiding into a wide, incredulous smile. "How did you even get in?" "We still have the emergency key," my mother said defensively. "You never asked for it back." "Right," I said, nodding slowly. "The key for emergencies. I suppose you deemed this an emergency." I pushed myself off the doorframe and walked closer, peering into the trash can at the pathetic, ashen remains. "Tell me," I said, looking from my mother's face to my father's. "Do you really honestly believe that's how the lottery works? That they hand you a giant, novelty check for nearly $4 million and that's it?" Their confused silence was my answer. "That thing," I said, pointing at the ashes, "is a prop. It's for press photos. It's a piece of cardboard with no monetary value whatsoever. I've had it stored in my closet for weeks." The color drained from my mother's face. My father's jaw tightened. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, my hands surprisingly steady. I opened my email and found the message from Ms. Thornton confirming the electronic transfer protocols. I held the screen out for them to see. "The actual funds are being transferred electronically to a secure trust account next week. The real ticket, the only thing that actually matters, is in a safe deposit box at a bank. What you just burned was my souvenir." The silence in the room was absolute. They stood frozen, the architects of a failed coup, their grand, dramatic gesture revealed as nothing more than a pathetic, misinformed tantrum. My mother sank onto the sofa as if her legs could no longer support her. Just then, the front door, which I had left ajar, swung open and Sarah walked in, carrying a bag of takeout. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes darting between my parents' stricken faces and me. "Oh," she said. "You're here." "I am," I said calmly, just in time to watch Mom and Dad commit a felony. They broke in and burned what they thought was my check. Sarah's face went pale. I didn't know they were going to do that," she stammered. "They just said they were going to come wait for you, to talk some sense into you." Whether she was lying or not hardly mattered. The three of them were a united front of entitlement and delusion. "All of you need to leave my home," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of finality. "Alara, please," my mother whispered from the sofa. "We made a terrible mistake. We were just so worried." "You were worried you were going to lose your access to my money," I corrected her gently. "There's a difference. After all we've done for you," my father began, his default defense. "This," I said, gesturing around the smoke-filled room, "is what this is all about. Your perception of what you've done for me versus the reality. And the reality is, I have taken care of myself for a very long time. You are not entitled to the fruits of my good fortune. Not my work, and not my luck." I walked to the door and held it open. "Leave. Now. Or my next call will be to the police." They gathered their things in a stunned, shuffling silence. As Sarah passed me, she paused, her eyes flashing with a familiar flicker of resentment. "This isn't fair," she muttered. "You're being so cruel." "No, Sarah," I replied, my voice soft but clear as glass. "Cruel is enabling our parents to break into your sister's home. Cruel is a lifetime of expecting your needs to be everyone else's priority. You've always been the sun, and you've never noticed who you were leaving in the shadows. That ends today." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, and then she was gone. After the door closed behind them, I leaned against it, my body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. But beneath the shaking, I felt a deep, profound calm. The illusion was shattered. The pretense of our family dynamic was gone, burned away more completely than the cardboard check in my trash can. I saw them all with perfect, painful clarity. And in that clarity, I found a strange and unexpected liberation. My first call was to a locksmith. My second was to Rachel. "You are not going to believe what just happened," I said, a smile touching my lips. "But I think, for the first time, everything is going to be okay." The year that followed was one of profound and quiet reconstruction. It was a year of building not just a new financial portfolio, but a new life, one whose foundation was built on self-respect and carefully fortified boundaries. The day the funds were officially transferred was anticlimactic. It was just a number on a screen, a digital confirmation of a new reality. With Ms. Thornton's expert guidance, the first thing I did was pay off the entirety of my student loan debt. Clicking the final confirmation button felt less like a financial transaction and more like an exorcism. A weight I had carried for over a decade simply vanished. Next, I bought a house. It wasn't a mansion or a flashy modern marvel. It was a charming 1920s craftsman bungalow in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, with a wide front porch and a small, private garden in the back. It had good bones, a sense of history, and a state-of-the-art security system. It was a sanctuary that I owned outright, a place where only those I trusted would ever cross the threshold. I maintained my distance from my immediate family. Their attempts at contact dwindled from desperate to sporadic, a mix of half-hearted apologies and lingering accusations. I learned through my Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, and a rare voice of reason in our family, that my parents had ended up taking out a substantial loan against their own home to bail Sarah out of her business debts. The pattern, it seemed, was too ingrained to break. Learning this brought me a pang of sadness, not of triumph. I had escaped the gravitational pull of their dysfunctional orbit, but they and Sarah were still trapped within it. My relationship with my sister, however, began a slow, tentative evolution. About 6 months after the burning incident, I received an email from her. It was short, uncharacteristically devoid of drama. She wrote that she had taken a job as an assistant manager at a local cafe. She admitted she had been forced to confront some hard truths about herself and her expectations. It was the first time she had ever acknowledged her own role in the family dynamic. Intrigued and cautiously hopeful, I agreed to meet her for coffee. The woman who sat across from me was different. The brittle, artistic entitlement was gone, replaced by a weary but genuine humility. She apologized, not just for her part in the lottery fiasco, but for a lifetime of taking her privilege for granted. "I never saw it," she said, stirring her latte. "How hard you worked. How much you did for yourself. I just thought, that's just how things were. That my needs were always more urgent." It wasn't a magical reconciliation. There were years of hurt and ingrained patterns between us. But it was a start. We began meeting every few weeks, talking not as the golden child and the responsible one, but as two women trying to forge a new, more honest relationship. The greatest transformation, however, was in my own sense of purpose. I had more money than I could ever reasonably spend on myself. After ensuring my own security, I found my greatest joy in giving it away thoughtfully. I established a small, private foundation dedicated to two causes close to my heart: historical preservation and financial literacy for young adults. I made a significant, anonymous donation to the Cedar Creek Historical Society, ensuring their archives would be properly maintained for decades to come. And I partnered with local community centers to create workshops teaching young people the basics of budgeting, saving, and investing, the very skills I had been forced to learn on my own. Seeing the impact of these initiatives was more fulfilling than any luxury I could have purchased. It was a different kind of wealth, the richness of purpose, the quiet satisfaction of creating positive change. One mild spring evening, a little over a year after my win, I was sitting on my front porch swing, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the twilight settle over the quiet street. My garden was beginning to bloom, and the air smelled of damp earth and new blossoms. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost breathtaking. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. It was a photo of a lopsided but charming ceramic mug she had made in a pottery class she was taking. "For your new house, if you'll have it," the message read. I smiled and texted back, "I'd love that." "It's beautiful." The journey had been painful, the confrontation with my family a necessary but heartbreaking crucible. But it had burned away the illusions, leaving only the truth. The lottery ticket had been a random stroke of luck, a freak accident of fate. But the life I was now living, a life of peace, purpose, and authentic connection, was no accident. It was a deliberate creation, built choice by choice, boundary by boundary. Life settled into a new, gentle rhythm. My days were a blend of purposeful work with the foundation and the quiet joys of my personal life. I started a small restoration project in my garage, carefully refinishing an old, damaged radio cabinet I'd found at a flea market. There was a deep satisfaction in the slow, meticulous work of sanding away the old, scarred varnish to reveal the beautiful wood beneath. My relationship with Sarah continued to mend, one cautious conversation at a time. We discovered a shared love for hiking the trails that snaked through the mountains around Cedar Creek. On these walks, surrounded by the towering silence of ancient pines, we found it easier to talk. We didn't rehash the past endlessly, but we acknowledged it. We were learning a new language for our sisterhood, one free from the old dialects of jealousy and obligation. One crisp Saturday afternoon in late autumn, about 18 months after my win, the doorbell rang. It was a sound that still, on occasion, sent a faint jolt of apprehension through me. I peered through the peephole and my heart stilled. It was my parents. They looked different. Smaller, somehow. The rigid posture of my father had softened, and my mother's face seemed etched with a weariness that went beyond simple aging. I took a deep, steadying breath, reminding myself that this was my home. My sanctuary. I was in control. I opened the door. "Alara," my mother said, her voice quiet. She was holding a small, foil-wrapped loaf of what I knew was her signature banana bread. An olive branch, baked with sugar and butter. "Mom." "Dad," I said, my tone even. "What are you doing here?" We were hoping we could talk to you," my father said, his gaze fixed on the welcome mat. "Just for a few minutes, if you're willing." The request, so devoid of the old command and assumption, was disarming. I saw in their faces not the villains of my memory, but two aging people standing on their daughter's doorstep, looking lost. The anger I had held onto for so long had cooled into something more like a sad, quiet ache. "All right," I said, stepping back. "You can come in for a few minutes." They entered my home for the first time, their eyes taking in the warm, light-filled space. They saw the restored furniture, the shelves full of books, the framed photos of my travels with Rachel. They saw the evidence of a life that was full and happy, a life I had built not only without them, but in spite of their attempts to derail it. We sat in the living room, an awkward silence settling between us. My mother placed the banana bread on the coffee table, a small, hopeful offering. Finally, my father spoke, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "We were wrong, Alara." The words were so simple, so direct, I thought I had misheard him. "What we did, breaking into your apartment, it was unforgivable," he continued, finally meeting my eyes. His were filled with a shame I had never seen in him before. "There's no excuse. We were blinded by fear, I think." Fear for Sarah, and a selfish, ugly sense of entitlement. We convinced ourselves we were doing it for the family, but we were just breaking it. My mother nodded, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "We lost our way," she whispered. "And we lost you. I look at the wonderful life you've built, the good you're doing with your foundation, and I am so proud, and so ashamed that we weren't here to see it. That we, in fact, tried to stop it. I listened, my own heart a tight knot in my chest. This was the apology I had never expected to hear. It was real. It was unadorned with justifications or blame. I appreciate you saying that, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Thank you. We don't expect you to forgive us, my father said quickly. We don't deserve it. But we wanted you to know. We wanted to say we are sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I looked at these two people who had caused me so much pain, and I felt a slow, surprising upwelling of compassion. They had, in their own misguided way, been trapped in the same family drama I was. They had just been playing a different role. I don't know about forgiveness, I said honestly. That's a complicated word. But I am willing to consider what comes next. Hope flickered in their eyes. I have worked very hard to find peace, I continued, choosing my words with the same care I used to restore Oldwood. I will not give it up. Any relationship we have from this point forward has to be a new one. It has to be honest. And it has to be healthy. For all of us. I leaned forward. That means therapy. All of us. You two, me and Sarah. Together. We need a professional to help us navigate the wreckage and see if we can build something new from it. That's my condition. It's not a punishment. It's the only path forward I can see. They looked at each other, a long, silent communication passing between them. I expected hesitation, perhaps even refusal. But my father simply nodded. If that's what it takes, he said. Whatever it takes. It was not a storybook ending. There was no tearful group hug, no magical erasure of the past. But as I showed my parents to the door a few minutes later, I felt a sense of closure that was more profound than I could have imagined. I had not bent. I had not broken. I had stood in my truth and offered a chance for healing, not from a place of weakness, but from a place of strength. After they left, I went to the kitchen, unwrapped the banana bread, and cut a small slice. It tasted exactly as I remembered, sweet, familiar, and full of a complicated kind of love. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. Everything okay? Just had a weird feeling. I smiled, my psychic, ever-loyal friend. Everything is okay, I typed back. Actually, I think it's better than okay. I took another bite of the bread, the sweetness mingling with the salt of a single tear that I hadn't realized had fallen. The future of my family was still an unwritten chapter. It might be messy and difficult, and it might not lead to the perfect reconciliation one sees in movies. But for the first time, it felt possible. And as I stood in the quiet of my kitchen, in the beautiful, peaceful home I had built for myself, I knew with a deep and certain clarity that no matter what happened next, I would be fine. My greatest fortune had never been about the money. It had been about finding the strength to build a life I loved, a life from which I no longer needed rescuing. I was already home,